Good afternoon. I've been doing quite a bit of reading recently, and so I thought I'd better catch up with book-based episodes of KabuffFM. So I'm going to talk today about this novel, which I've been meaning to read pretty much ever since I moved to Glasgow, but kind of a decade on. Here I am with No Mean City, a classic novel of Glasgow life. And from this novel you can see where many of the stereotypes about gangland culture and knives come from, or razors in particular, with regards to this novel. So this is how the back cover copy of it goes. No Mean City is the famous best-selling novel of Glasgow's pre-war underworld. This book was published in 1935. An underworld still shocking in its crude brutality, the savage near-truth descriptions, the raw character portrayals, bringing to life a story that's fascinating, horrifying and convincing. This is the story of the gangs that the Gorbals bred, the story of Johnny Stark, a man all women loved and all men feared, the Razor King. And then in true, this is a kind of post-war paperback style, bestseller style. It says on the back cover copy over 500,000 corgi copies sold, and on the copyright page it actually shows you, I'm such a book historian, all of the kind of reprintings that happened there. I have another book history aspect of this I want to talk about in just a moment. So this book, set in the East End of Glasgow, in the interwar period where gangland violence was rife, and in the back of the book, and I don't know if this was included from the very beginning or not, there's an appendix, and it talks about how all the characters are imaginary and the book itself merely fiction. The authors, this is what I'm going to talk about, the authors, plural, maintain that they have not drawn an exaggerated picture of the conditions in the Glasgow tenements or of life as it is lived amongst the gangster element of that slum population. And then what it gives is a set of quotations from newspapers about various different aspects of social life living in extremely crowded tenements in Glasgow, and kind of gangland violence at the same time. So this book focuses in particular on Johnny Stark, the Razor King, but I'm actually gonna start off, I'm going to read in the middle and then talk about the other historical element I wanted to talk about a bit, which is actually about his father, who's also called John. So this is from the very first chapter, chapter 1, Rent Must Be Paid. In the thick and stagnant darkness, John Stark lay wide awake. His wife slept beside him and their youngest child whimpered in the crook of her arm. The door of the cavity bed was barely ajar, for the night was cold and the children had opened the window which gave upon the street. Stark was so accustomed to the sour stench of the house that he preferred to lie there in a sort of cupboard, stiflingly close, but warm with the heat of their three bodies. Cavity beds are so common a feature of the Glasgow slums that even to this day, the tenement dwellers take them for granted. The ordinary room and kitchen apartment, and even the one-room single end, always include a cavity bed or beds. These beds are no more than windowless closets, little tombs about 5 feet by 5 by 3.5. The door of each closes upon the side of the bed and flush with the wall of the room itself. Stark's discarded trousers lay on the top of the blankets. The baby had bronchitis and was likely to be sick again if it started coughing. He did not want to wake the child or his wife, and so his hand moved stealthily inch by inch to the pocket which contained all that was left of his week's money. He did not take the money out. He counted it up by the feel of each separate coin, reaching the same total again and again. Then, very, very softly, he whispered blasphemies, for he was a shilling short of the rent. Oh no. So set amongst very kind of poor communities in the Gorbals, and kind of fascinating that it went on to become such a big bestseller. But the other book historical aspect of this I wanted to talk about is that there are two authors, A. MacArthur and H. Kingsley Long, and from my understanding, aka a very quick bit of Wikipediaing, though I did, being a professional academic, try and have a look via Google Scholar as well. I couldn't discover too much about it, so I must try a little bit harder. But one of these two, and I've now forgotten which one was which, sorry, sent some stories off to the publisher. And he was of that community, he was from the Gorbals, so there's kind of some scenes which are, seem to be very, very true to life. And then the publisher matched him up with the other writer who was a journalist. I don't know if the journalist was from Glasgow or not, so these two things came together, but I'm not sure how that kind of worked either in textual terms, like whether it was just the stories were given to the journalist and the journalist put them together, or whether they worked on it jointly or not, and I'd like to find out more about that. And I'd also be really, really keen to know what happened to all of the royalties. Were they split jointly or not? I don't know. If over 500,000 copies were sold with this printing, that would be quite a lot of money. I think it's really interesting thinking about that joint authorship as well, because there's some scenes which, like the one that I just read, are super immediate and you get right into the action that's happening, and there's some really kind of visceral scenes as well of the fights, and some great kind of preparation that Johnny Stark, the Razor King, does on Glasgow Green when he's exercising to get ready for the fights and to keep himself slim and trim. But there's also some kind of really quite didactic parts as well, and whichever one it was, maybe both of them, I don't know, they were clearly kind of very, very down on socialism as a response to the kind of poverty that was there. So there's some kind of sections where it talks about how some of these working class characters were kind of taken up with socialist politics, but they were only doing it, they didn't really believe it at all, and that certainly wasn't the response to all of the ills that this particular book talks about. So I'd like to find out a bit more about its creation and production, actually. So if anybody knows, let me know. I'll try and find out more. And that's it. Hope you're all keeping well. Bye.